this go on? They turn it on back there? Okay.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the 9th of November DDRC meeting. We welcome you, and we call the meeting to order. The Commission is made up of volunteers with expertise or interest in historic preservation and design. We generally meet on the second Thursday of the month to review cases. The Commission is supported by the city's urban planning and historic preservation staff who are here today. Please let them know if you have any questions, taking care not to impede the proceedings. The meeting generally proceeds with staff calling the case and describing it. The applicant may also come forward to add to the basic description of the request if necessary. If so, please try to keep that presentation to less than 10 minutes. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. After this period, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal, and audience comments shall be kept to 2 minutes per person. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond, and this rebuttal shall be kept to 5 minutes. In most of the cases, we will make a decision tonight after all information has been presented. If your case is denied, or if you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone with standing have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. All decisions of this commission are based on existing guidelines and ordinances. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in. The sheet was at the back of the room and will be at the podium. Please note that these meetings are streamed live, recorded, and broadcast, so please use discretion with any personal information you choose to share in the course of the proceedings. Also, please speak up so that you can be clearly heard, both here at the commission level as well as at the audience dais. All motions and decisions are made while applying all of the facts to all of the guidelines. Will all persons who plan to testify stand and raise their right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings? Thank you, sir. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Here.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Daniel? Yes. Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Here.
Mr. Heiler? Here. Mr. Savory? Here. Mr. Nguyen?
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you very much. Does the agenda stand?
We've had a few changes since publication. Under the consent agenda, we have a deferral of 301 South Saluda Avenue, which was a request for recommendation for landmark status. And under the regular agenda, historic portion, we also have deferrals for 2323 Pendleton, which was a request for design approval for demolition in the Old Shandon Waverly Protection Area A, and a deferral of new construction on a parcel adjacent to 2307 Marion Street in Cottontown Bellevue Architectural Conservation District.
Thank you very much. The Design Development Review Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include residential site improvements such as fences, minor exterior changes, or signage. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will you read, please, the remaining consent agenda, or current consent agenda?
Certainly. It's a historic preservation project at 911 Lady Street, which is a request for design approval for an addition in the West Gervais Historic Commercial District.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to remove an item from the consent agenda?
Mr. Marshall is the architect. He's in the audience. If you'd like to remove it from the consent agenda to be heard.
Very good. Is there a motion to accept or to remove from the consent agenda 911 Lady Street and move it to the regular agenda? We have a motion. Is there a second? I will second. Is there any discussion? Will you call the roll, please, for a vote?
Certainly. Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Daniel? Yes. Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Mr. Heiler? Yes. Mr. Savory? Yes. Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Having had this change from consent agenda to regular agenda, will you please introduce this case at 911 Lady Street?
This is an addition to a modest one-story, circa 1930 brick building in the West Gervais district. It has Art Deco accents, 3-bay facade, separated by brick pilasters. And the addition is simply set far back on the building, down on the existing alleyway, which is owned by the owner of the property, towards the back of the building. It's a simple one-car garage, which has been designed to look more like a shed sort of addition to an existing building rather than a garage. And as I said, Mr. Marshall is here if you have questions for him.
Please, Mr. Marshall, come up and, well, I guess you didn't stand in.
I did not plan to talk, but
We'll have to have you raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
The ingress into Ms. Craig's parking lot is off of Letty Street, and it exits by Lorix through their driveway onto Washington Street. So I guess my question, does Ms. Craig have an easement that goes across the Washington property, or the Lorix property? Because I think my concern would be if she does not have a written easement and this structure is built, how are people going to turn around to go back out of her parking lot?
To my knowledge, Ms. Craig does not have an easement. She's got a verbal agreement, and they've allowed each other to go through. This really doesn't change the ability to turn around or not turn around. The parking, as it's currently configured, is angled and is based on a driving through in one way. You could do a three-point turn. This would not stop you from doing the same. This is only 22 feet long, and there's another 125 or 30 feet before this. So it's the same turn, and it's not changing the number of cars because we're taking two angled spaces and putting one of the angled spaces in the garage, and the second space, there will be room to parallel where the first angled space was and still drive by this. So I don't see that it changes your ability to get in or out of it any different from it is now. I mean, without going through Lorix, you would have to make a very complicated three-point turn in her alley, but that's what you have to do now if you don't want to go through Lorix. I mean, there's no cul-de-sac at the end, or there's no additional ability to turn around now that will go away once this is put into place.
Mr. Marshall, one other question. The last two parking spots at the end of Ms. Craig's property, will those remain regular car parks, or will they be reconfigured so only compact cars will go there? Because it's...
The last two spaces, one of the last two spaces will be replaced by this garage, and the other one will go from being an angled space to being just a parallel space against the adjacent building to the right. Okay, so you'll have the same number of cars, just they will not be the last two angled spaces.
Thank you.
If I might interject, these are all excellent questions, and our zoning department would typically handle those if there are any questions or as this goes through the process of permitting. So I'm sure all that will, if there's any question, that's going to be resolved.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak for or against this project? There being none, is there a motion to move forward or to accept or deny this certificate of design approval for the addition? I will make the motion to approve this request. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? There being none, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight? Yes. Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Daniel?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Mr. Heiler?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. That takes us to our next case on the regular agenda.
Mr. Chairman, we need to approve the minutes, I think.
Yes, actually, the minutes shall be approved along with the consent agenda. You're right, since we bypassed the consent agenda as well. Is there a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Of our previous meeting, we have a motion to accept. Is there a second?
Second.
We have 2 seconds. Any discussion? There being none, will you call the roll, please, again?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Daniel?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Mr. Hyler? Yes. Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on from that to now the regular agenda. That would be for 1311 Pendleton Street, 10,000 or 1002 Sumter Street. Request for certificate of design approval for signage, and it's an appeal of the staff denial of the application.
So, yes, this is the first case at 1311 Pendleton Street. This is for new signage at the NBSC Synovus Branch Bank at the corner of Pendleton and Sumter. The package actually does have 12 signs, only 6 require design approval. Several of them aren't visible from the right-of-way. The 6 which require design approval include 1 monument sign on the corner, which I'll refer to as sign number 1, 2 wall signs, which are 3 and 4, and 3 freestanding directional signs, which are numbered 6, 9, and 23. And you'll see those in your packet. The signs are within the maximum allowance in the C1 zoning district. However, staff is tasked with ensuring compliance with the letter and intent of the city center design guidelines prior to issuance of a certificate of design approval. The 2 wall signs, 3 and 4, meet the city center design guidelines and can be approved by staff. However, the 4 remaining freestanding signs, 1, 6, 9, and 23, have been determined not to meet the design guidelines and have been denied approval by staff. This property is in the City Center Design District, where the goal is to create and support contextual development in a pedestrian-oriented environment. Generally, design guidelines can't address every particular situation, and when such circumstances are not addressed but require CDAs, the principles and objectives of a given district are used to guide decisions. In this case, there are not specific guidelines related to freestanding signs in the City Center guidelines. Therefore, staff uses Section 1.2.1 Development Principles and Section 1.6 Purpose and Objectives of the guidelines to determine whether a freestanding sign proposal is in compliance with the intent of the guidelines and compatible with its immediate context. So I won't read through all of the principles. The first one under development principles says promote residential development in a pedestrian-friendly environment. And under 1.6 Purpose and Objectives of the guidelines, one of them is to reinforce and build upon Columbia's architectural and design assets. And then the second one is to create a high-quality, pedestrian-friendly environment in city center. So these being the most relevant to this proposal, support the design of signage that is compatible with surrounding architecture, streetscape, and pedestrian-oriented environment. So to be consistent in making decisions, staff generally recommends freestanding signs not exceed 5 to 6 feet in height to maintain the top of the sign not be taller than the average pedestrian. Since this is not an ordinance, there is some flexibility in this number. However, exceptions have typically been renovations of existing non-conforming signs or locations which are adjacent to higher volume, high-speed traffic corridors. And then there's some other language about materials. I think some renovation or some changes have been made since the packet went out. I believe it was just the color of the sign. Originally, the large monument sign did have the Panaflex facing, and I think that's been changed to aluminum. And then the directionals still have the Panaflex. So
no, the directionals would be aluminum.
Oh, they're also aluminum? Okay. So I guess the materials is not an issue anymore. It's really just the freestanding monument sign, which is still a 10-foot tall proposal. And Steve Fitz is here from the sign company who did the design and is doing the proposal, and he's here to answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello, sir. You are Steve Fitz, I assume?
am.
Nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
Please proceed if you'd like to add to anything.
NBSC has been owned by Synovus for a number of years, and Synovus has decided to take all those affiliates and put them under one name, and that name is Synovus. So this is the new branding standard for the Synovus sign program. One thing they have done unique, and it was a change after we submitted this document, is the state president for Synovus wanted to go with the Carolina colors on the sign, and so this is the Panaflex material, which we wouldn't be using, but this would be the garnet colors that they want to use on the sign, if that's acceptable. So that was the change on that. In your booklet there, I have one set of drawings that's, I think, brand guidelines, and it shows the size of the existing sign that we have now, as well as the other signs that are part of the Synovus standard family of signs. One of the reasons we wanted to go above the 5 feet in height is that this sign is in the parking lot, and there are cars that park right next to it, and there are some small shrubs on the side of it. So we would like as much consideration as you would give us in increasing the height of it from 5 feet to, as you can see, the minimum height that we have there for the smaller sign is 6 feet. On the directional signs, you are only allowing 2 square feet, which means that we would have to go back with directional signs that are similar to what you see there now, which is the post and panel signs. And we would like to use the more architecturally pleasing directional signs that are designed this type of sign rather than just a post and panel sign. And I believe the 2 wall signs were fine. As they were submitted. They did meet the guidelines. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If you'll remain there, we most likely have questions from the commission.
I have a question for staff on the directional signage. Are you calculating measurement of the entire sign or just the lettering of the sign?
Well, zoning actually does the calculations for square footage. I believe it's just the sign panel itself.
That was my understanding as well, so I don't know why the architectural detail would cause any conflict there. I wouldn't think that it would.
At 2 square feet, we can make it work as long as it's that red panel as you're discussing.
Yeah, I would definitely want to verify that with zoning because that's how they do all the calculations, but I believe that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Hyler. Any other commissioners? Mr. Daniel?
Mr. Fitz, this is just a personal preference. I like what you have now at the corner of Sumter and Pendleton.
Yes, sir.
Is there any way that you could just, instead of having the NBSC, put the Synovus there, make it a little bit deeper or wider, and then put your banking lending across the bottom or something? Would that fit, and just sort of work around the height and the look of that particular sign, or does that sort of mess up what y'all are trying to do?
Well, it's not, that would be changing the brand standard here in the capital city for Synovus. Of course we could do that. Of course we could rebrand it that way. I mean, we could change out that sign face. That is possible to do, yes, sir.
That's just my personal preference, but that's...
I agree, it's a nice looking sign.
Mr. Fitz, how tall is the existing NBSC sign?
The NBSC sign now, it's on the page, I think it's 7 feet.
7 feet.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And you'd be going 10 feet, I think, on your change.
That's the request, but your height restriction is 5, so any consideration we can be given for something higher, we'd appreciate.
I believe Mr. Hyler, are you done?
Go ahead.
Mr. Broom?
Okay, I don't know. I'm not clear what Jim was talking about, but let me verify something. The original design of the sign out front has that curved top.
Yes, sir.
And from my understanding, that is a brand designed from the building. If you look at the front entrance, the entrance has a curved roof. It's a copy. Is there any way you can keep that so that it be still the same as the building itself?
That sign that's out there now was originally installed at the village at Sand Hills to meet their guidelines out there. So it's just coincidental that it matched with that roof line. I would say that if we were going to try to stay with that roof line, we'd probably be better off to stay with the existing sign and rework it in some manner.
Question for staff, do we have purview over those design elements of the sign, or is it really more about the pedestrian nature and the materials?
I mean, I guess the reason that staff denied it was due to the height.
Sure.
But I mean, certainly the design, now that it's before the DDRC, I mean, the design, all the sign design guides, technically are within your purview.
And so you've got basically 3 standard sizes.
There's another page of those. Missing from your sheet.
And the rationale for going to the 10-foot versus staying to the 6 or 7?
It's trying to get additional height above the cars. So once again, I'd like to reiterate, any consideration we can be given above the 5, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a concern sticking to the height that's there today, but I don't know that going up to 10 foot would keep in the pedestrian nature of the guidelines.
I would add to that, Mr. Heiler. I think that the element here is the both heavily trafficked pedestrian nature of that street and that intersection, as well as the vehicular traffic concern. The height, of course, I understand your explanation regarding the shrubbery and vehicular heights that, SUVs and so on currently are. But I think that overwhelmingly our concern here should be relegated to the pedestrian-friendly nature of that street. And the precedent that this would set in terms of future signage along these heavily trafficked areas.
I would also ask if you could abandon a couple of those parking spaces and still meet zoning compliance so that you actually gave the sign some more visibility without increasing the height.
That would be something we'd have to research and see if we could do that. And one thing that your officials have done here is these signs are normally fully lighted faces. This whole thing lights up. And now the new restrictions are that just the copy would be pushed through and lighted. So I think that addresses some of the pedestrian concerns that you have.
I agree, and certainly in our packet that's been presented to us as a recommendation that you not have a internal illumination, and that it be either it's externally illuminated or pushed through lighting. You're in agreement to
Yes, sir.
To consider either of those two options?
Yes, we were looking at push through, and we had agreed to that.
Great.
And would y'all be open, if the bank wants to put a little bit of flood lighting on it as well?
That's, I believe, perfectly reasonable and acceptable to the Planning Commission or the staff as well as to us here on the Commission as well. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's my feeling is I agree with staff that 10 feet just seems overwhelming, but I would not be closed to the idea of giving you a little bit more leeway than 6 feet, since the existing sign, I guess if I understand this correctly, is 7'3". I think 10 feet is just overwhelming. But everything else that's been discussed, it looks like we're moving in the right direction. I think the 7.5-foot option to me would seem reasonable. I think one of the things about the existing sign is that it's very wide. So I think I don't think that going a few inches taller I don't think the effect would be significantly greater, but it is a nice corner, and it's a heavily, traffic pedestrian corner. Everything else that you've discussed, I think, is, particularly the lighting solution, I think is the appropriate compromise.
Mr. Chairman, I could bring up one other issue. I don't know whether we approved it or whether it was zoning. St. Peter's has a sign as a digital sign. I think that was really what was approved by BOSA. But their sign at the corner of Assembly and, Hampton Street, has a big opening, and you have the base, and then you have a big opening, and then you have the sign at the top. And that would seem to be sort of a way to deal with the visual walking by it types. I still like the shorter one. I mean, that's another one I think that's been approved in the city center in the last couple of years. just as an alternative. My preference would be to go with, what Mr. Fitz has suggested with not quite the height or like what they got now.
Well, any further discussion? Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Anyone else have anything else to inquire or to add? Staff have any additional thoughts here? No? Sir, do you have any other thoughts or questions?
I don't have any questions. I think, like y'all were talking, that the 7'6" would be a good compromise on this, and in particular, we'd push through letters, and we've got the shrubbery along the front of the sign too, so we aren't right in the pedestrian face.
Okay. I am obligated to ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak for or against this application and the proposal within. There being none, would anyone like to offer a motion?
I will. I move that we grant a certificate of design approval conditioned upon that the freestanding monument sign, sign number 1, be reduced in height not to exceed 7 feet 6 inches tall, and that the three freestanding directional signs, I don't think don't need to say any longer, be changed to something such as aluminum, right? They're fine. Be illuminated with push-through illuminated letters and external illumination, but not illuminated themselves.
Not fully face illuminated.
Pardon me?
Not the full
Right.
face illumination.
Right. Not full face illumination. Thank you.
Is there any, is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Heiler. Any further discussion?
Let me just clarify. We're going now with the rectangular sign
Yes.
that we show, not with the ridge on top,
Correct.
but just a straight, but just not as tall.
Correct.
Okay.
The type of graphic and signage that he is proposing, just not as tall.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion to accept with conditions as stated by Mr. Savory. We have a second by Mr. Heiler. Any further discussion? There being none, would you call the roll, please, for a vote?
Mr. Bucknight,
Yes.
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt, Mr. Heiler,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes.
Mr. Wynn.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Very nice to see you.
And we're fine with Carolina colors, right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
We'll look forward to seeing those signs.
We can't comment on
Be
colors.
coming up next year. Thank you.
We are now at a point where if there's no other, is there any other business?
I'd like to ask one question. We've had sort of a reduced agenda the last few months. Is there a lot of stuff in the pipeline that we're to probably see first quarter of 18?
Well, December, you'll be seeing.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions? There being none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We've got a motion by Mr. Daniel to adjourn. Is there a second? We've got 2 seconds again. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
We got a tenant for the building, we got a tenant for our space in our building. So we're like,
Didn't interfere.
renovations.
You said
It's all,
you think it interfered?
it's, actually, I'm sure you know.